So I would like to welcome everyone who is listening online, and I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. So before we start the meeting, I'm sure all of us who were here on the 9th of March are acutely aware that Councillor Malcolm Spalding came with the other Earls Court residents and brought his call for action to the meeting with his residents, and many of his residents spoke to the meeting, and Malcolm was really at his best. And just to say that I have now referred that to the leadership team and said that I would really like, for those that don't know, it was about antisocial behaviour in Earls Court and what measures could be taken to tackle that. And I would like it to be his legacy, because we were all really shocked 2 days later to hear that he had died. And it's just, I just hold it in my mind how he was at that meeting, because, it was his finest hour, and Malcolm always put the needs and the concerns of his residents first, and he really was, which we should all try and be, he was a dedicated public servant, and I wanted to pay tribute to him. He was always very helpful, always very courteous, and so I just wanted to remember him, and for the meeting now to remember him, and to also allow anyone on the committee or anyone else if they would like to say a few words about Malcolm. No.
I have worked with Malcolm on a few committees and working groups, and I really admired what he was doing, and I had a great respect for him, and I was really shocked by his loss. Our communities were expecting the best out of him, because he was one of the good councillors who was non-partisan, always trying to help others, and willing to work with everyone. So I'm really sorry for his loss.
Thank you. Well, I can't better the words that you started, Chair, but I worked Malcolm very closely on the Common Committee when I first started, and he was so good at bringing residents' concerns to the council, and that was really what I saw first of all. The short-term lets working group, which predated me but has continued during this term, is a prime example of that, but there were numerous others, and I can only echo what you said, Chair, about that meeting, our last OSC meeting, being Malcolm's finest hour, because that was the belter of the speech that he made on behalf of his residents. And I do hope that it has the effect it deserves and the issues taken forward.
Thank you, Ray. Janet.
I would like to mention how kind Malcolm was to everybody, with a heart of gold. And whether, as Mo said, he worked with nonpartisan, he worked with the residents, he was caring. And for some reason, when we had our vaccines, he and I, for some reason, were 15 minutes apart each time. So he drove me for the vaccine, so we had that moment to share. And Greg and I campaigned with him recently, and his heart was in his community. And it was really an honor to know him.
Thank you.
I completely echo that his heart was absolutely an Earl's Court, focused on that. And Mr. Earl's Court, in terms of, and a really good local councillor for the interest of his residents. And I remember hearing years ago from a friend, no longer on the council, that the essence of being a councillor was representing your residents. And he did that.
So I don't really think I can add much more, but I mean, Malcolm was a really good councillor. His name recognition on the doorstep is, unbeatable. I don't think anybody else has that in the council. And he was a true gentleman. He was a very, very nice man.
Thank you. We move on. I have apologies for absence for Will Pascal. Miss Pascal?
Yeah.
And Emma Will. I don't think anyone else is picking that apologies. So we go to, does anyone have any declaration of interest? No? So we will go to A3, which is in a way quite fitting. It's about community safety, and I would ask Mr. Stuart Priestley to come to the table and introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Stuart Priestley. I'm the Council's Chief Community Safety Officer. This paper concerns the Community Safety Plan. And this is the second time we've brought a paper to the committee concerning the development of the plan. So we came to the committee in July, and at that point we'd undertaken quite a lot of consultation with residents and key stakeholders, focus groups and engagement. And we'd heard what they said and what they said we should be prioritising. We came and we discussed with you the draft priorities for the next community safety plan, kind of how we would lay it out, kind of structure and what have you. And committee members endorsed all of that, felt that that was moving in the right direction. Made some really helpful and useful suggestions, particularly that ASB, antisocial behaviour I should say, should include graffiti and that environmental crime, as well as e-scooters and cycling on the pavement. That we should look to develop a joined up response across the council and with housing providers, particularly around antisocial behaviour. That mental health and the impact of mental health on individuals in the wider community in the context of antisocial behaviour should be kind of reflected in our plan. And you might recall as well at the time it was a Lancaster West resident who was invited to also speak and spoke quite passionately about Lancaster West and the need for a greater police presence around the Lancaster West estate. So that's what we spoke about last time. In the time, and at that time, I think you all, we said at that time that we had a timeline to try and develop the plan, publish it sort of around Christmas time. And we've been set back on that timeline. A lot of the officers within community safety are also involved in the council's emergency arrangements. And they were, and I was, diverted to respond to a number of incidents, most notably the arrival of the Afghan evacuees and the kind of response to that. So that has pushed our timelines out. There's a sequencing thing as well. You'll appreciate that we've had conversations with you about the development of the violence against women and girls strategy and the youth violence and exploitation strategy. And both of those, the youth violence and exploitation strategy is being considered later this month at leadership team, and the violence against women and girls strategy has been set, being signed off. So there's a bit of sequencing that we need, because they're key components within the overarching community safety plan, and that's the plan that we're talking about here today. So we need to get those bits right. The slippage in time has actually enabled us to do some more engagement, and I don't think in this area you can do enough, actually. So we had a really good session with the Grenfell communities via the Grenfell Assembly. We had a community safety specific Grenfell Assembly last month, and we've developed a citizens panel, community safety citizens panel, which is just completed. I've seen a very early draft, and we've had 324 responses to that, and that will further be fed into the development of this plan. So you will recall I spoke last time about the priorities for the community safety plan, those being violence, violence against women and girls, and also youth violence and exploitation, and also antisocial behaviour. Now I won't talk for much longer, you'll be pleased to know, but I won't talk too much about youth violence and exploitation and violence against women and girls, because we've sort of had those conversations here, and we have plans of strategy either published or about to be published. But antisocial behaviour and drugs are two of the other things which I know are really, really important and play into and are a key part of the council call to action that we heard so passionately and eloquently from councillors and from residents at the last meeting. And antisocial behaviour is kind of an area that can be a bit nebulous at times, because it's subjective definition, alarm, distress or harassment, and that's the individual's perception of that. But in a ward like Earl's Court, for instance, you know what antisocial behaviour is when you see it. It's fair. And our approach to that is founded on problems, on partnership, problem solving, understanding the analysis, understanding the extent and the nature of the problems, joining up our services, joining up with the relevant parts, the key players that have agency in this area, be they not just the police and things like the wardens, but providers of social housing, drug and alcohol services, and mental health. And I'm sure you'll ask me some questions on that. So we have aspirations to, we'll be developing antisocial parts of our antisocial behaviour plan, which will be founded upon those. But things like further development of our wardens and expansion of our wardens. We published our CCTV strategy last year. We're quite ambitious around CCTV as a local authority, very much wanting to work with local businesses as well as with residents around CCTV. CCTV isn't, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, it's not the be all and end all, but it's a really key tool in the toolbox of fighting, or preventing and detecting crime and antisocial behaviour. And then the other area that residents told us that they really wanted us to focus on and respond to was drugs. Now, drugs have a pernicious effect across communities, and this is a local authority area that is affected by drugs, and that cuts across all classes, cuts across all wards, cuts across all demographics, plays out in very different ways for different communities and for different ages, and particularly young people as well. Colleagues within public health have already undertaken quite a bit of work in this area, which will support us around developing the chapter on tackling drugs. But that needs to be quite central to the plan. One of the things that we haven't done in the past is have a dedicated separate section on drugs. We've tried to represent it across the plan. What we heard loud and clear was that we needed a chapter, a separate section on drugs, which set out what the local authority and its partners were going to do about drugs. And without wishing to prejudge some of the work that's already been undertaken in this area, I think it will locate around awareness raising, access to treatment services at every single point, be it within schools, colleges, health services, the criminal justice system. It's about swift and effective enforcement, and I don't just mean enforcement by the police and the courts. It's looking at other ways, what we call Achilles heel type ways of enforcing or nudging people into different ways of behaving. But it also means as well tackling middle class drug use and the effects that middle class drug use has on our communities. And I've been having conversations with the borough commander and with Emma, and she would mention this now were she here, about some of the side effects that we're seeing of middle class drug use, and that is drug dealers blazonly approaching people in Chelsea, offering them cards with things like party drugs, with things like that. Now that is a byproduct of that. So drugs is another area, and I've been a bit. The paper's a bit light on drugs, but the plan won't be. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know that you haven't really had enough time to digest the Earls Court call for action, but I'd like to say something about the top of my ward, Redcliffe, where there is a drugs problem, and say that if you would like, I can take you round with the guy that runs the youth club, and he will be able to tell you all the places that they're actually doing, that, I mean, I know some myself anyway, because I've seen it, but if you would like, I can arrange that maybe after the election, to actually go around and see where they are just dealing, because there's a lot of families living there, there's a lot of social housing.
So I would very much appreciate that, and I will take you up on that offer.
Okay.
One of the things that we are doing is one of the apparatus within the community safety governance is a strategic problem-solving group. So this is a director-level group that identifies knotty and long-term issues and develops longer-term strategic plans. Earls Court has been identified as one of those areas. I am the chair of that group, and I'm leading that group. As part of that work, I want to be going out and engaging with all of the kind of different residents within residents group and spending a lot of time within Earls Court getting a sense for it. So I was out last week with the police and the wardens for a couple of hours, just wandering around, listening to residents, getting a sense of the place, walking the back streets. It's not a big ward, so sort of getting a sense of it. So I will definitely set you up.
Okay. Stuart, who's next? Greg or?
Say something. I don't actually have any questions, but I mean, I wholeheartedly endorse what you've said, Stuart, and your comments about drugs and Earls Court. The western end of the ward that Janet and I represent is adjacent to Earls Court, and we certainly have some of the same issues around there. But the whiff of specialist cigarettes, if I can put it like that, is obvious, not just there, but actually all around South Kensington you get a whiff of it. And indeed, in 2019, I had students in one of the basement flats in my building, and we need to say no more about that as an experience. So it's all around there, and I think I welcome the focus on drugs in the paper. I mean, I basically endorse everything you've written. I think it's really good where it's benefited from the extra time and the discussion we had on it last time. I mean, essentially, I'm looking to see some action and when the paper is finally goes live, as it were, from the drafting stage.
Yeah. Thank you, I really appreciate that. And just to say that whilst we are developing this, our wardens are still out there. We are still tasking, we are still working with the police around these issues and trying to keep our foot down as much as we possibly can to continue our work across all of these issues and others.
And just to also say, because it might be discourteous if I didn't say it, that while I want action yesterday, I do understand the reasons why you and your team have been diverted earlier in the year. So there's no discourtesy intended with my comments about that.
No.
Yeah. Well, you might be aware that I have been a bit loud about antisocial behavior in the past 5-6 years because I have 6 or 7 live cases in my ward with tenants, and I'm sure there are tens of cases elsewhere. One element I'm very interested in to know is some of those who are committing these crimes or distributing illegal drugs are housing association and council tenants, few of them at least. But are you aware of any cases that people being evicted because of breach of tenancy? Because this is clearly one of the conditions not to deal in drugs used in these houses. I'm not aware because I pushed very much, I did my best. There was a tenant who was drug dealing in my ward, who was a housing association tenant. They couldn't do anything about it. And how could we fix this?
So so we've, within the council's community safety team, we have a really strong and effective relationship with housing management services, I think. And I think that we've seen since that service has come in-house an increase in its capability and its willingness to tackle antisocial behaviour. So my officers work very closely with housing management services officers. That relationship is not replicated across all the housing providers, I'm afraid to say. So I think there is more to be done in working with housing providers, and my ambition is that we are more effective in that area and we can support those housing providers. And I think the way perhaps we may have gone about it in the past hasn't always been the most effective. So I think in the past we've just been a bit frustrated with some housing providers and their lack of willingness to come to the table and work in partnership with us. And we sort of thrown up our arms in the air going, oh, but I think we need to make it easier for those housing providers to come and work with us. And that is engaging them earlier on, supporting them to develop some of their tools and their practices, sharing some of our best practice that we've developed with them, so that we can not just try and sort of hold them to account, but also to support them to improve, I think is what I'm saying. But I really do, I hear what you're saying, and I think there really is more to be done in that area.
It's actually on the same point.
Okay,
I wonder
so
if it's just, because I was actually going to ask you about the housing associations, because I did a lot of casework, particularly on the West Cromwell Road. And I do think that the housing providers are not quick enough to do anything. And then there's a complete breakdown in trust between the other residents who are being affected. And it's a really big issue. So whatever we can do, I think something's got to happen, because it's really bad.
Yes, and I wouldn't want to say that they're all bad.
No, I'm not saying they're all bad.
or that they're all bad all the time. But I think there's such a mixture of response and grit that I want to be able to try and be the kind of catalyst to improve that across the piece.
But on the West Cromwell Road, it is only one housing provider.
Yeah.
It's a big area.
Yeah.
And some of the hostels allow the residents to carry on taking drugs. And you know, and that is, you know, if you've got enough of them, then that's why it's such a problem in our school, because you have the critical mass of so many of them. But I know certainly one in particular. I mean, I don't think they do it anymore, but I'm not sure, but in the past, certainly they allowed them to take drugs and shoot up in the garden, you know, that just went on, and they advised us round, and then they didn't even get rid of the needles.
Yes.
And when I said to them, well, you know, we allowed, you know, shouldn't be taking sort of heroin in the garden. They go, well, it would be very difficult to stop people from using drugs. That was, you know.
Yes. So I think just a couple of points on that. I think we have a range of different tenures of housing, which is provided across the authority, across the borough. And I think we want to work with, I want to work with all of the kind of general needs, which I think is the type of housing tenure you were describing. And then, Chair, I think you're specifically talking about some of those high intensity services in Earls Court, and that will form part of our approach, which actually is engaging. But they are working with the most complex, that is the highest threshold of housing that we're providing. They're working with the most complex and challenging of our residents.
I'll just dive in, Chair, and just say there are examples of good practice, and I'll give you one, because our Courtfield Safe Neighbourhood team did manage to defeat an organised crime gang on the edges of Earls Court, and all three of the individuals were evicted by court order from social housing, and in that particular case the housing association was very cooperative. That was Westway, not name them because it was a good example, and it was a genuine success. And while there's still low-level antisocial behaviour, a significant degree of antisocial behaviour that the organised crime gang belonged was a step ahead of that, and that was defeated by a safe neighbourhood team, and a greater degree of harmony has been restored as a result of that. So it can be done. Yeah. But it was an enormous amount of effort by our ward police team, and I will commend them for that in public, as I've done several times, but they did a cracking job.
Can I move on to violence against women and girls, please? You have definitely raised the awareness in the borough on that subject, and I was wondering, A, how much you work with the police on that, and second of all, how effective it has been. Could you talk us through some not specifics, but some cases where you have been successful?
I can't talk you through some specifics, I'm afraid.
No, of course not.
You will recall my colleague Shabana Corsa, who spoke in granular detail. She's not with us tonight, and I won't be able to match her level of knowledge and expertise around this. But in answer to your first question, the police are kind of an integral partner around tackling violence against women and girls. They are linked in at all of the apparatus that exists around tackling violence against women and girls. And we have a governance structure which is aligned to the strategy, which looks at several areas such as bringing offenders to justice, children and young people, housing, modern slavery and exploitation, and a number of other areas. And the police are represented across there, as well as the senior strategic group. And their work is sort of integral to the overall delivery of our strategy, if you like. And as to the kind of efficacy of the work of that partnership, well, that partnership seeks to prevent violence against women and girls, and the work it does with young people around kind of acceptable behaviours, it seeks to identify those women and girls who are being abused or at risk of being abused, and to safeguard them and support them where they have been abused to recover and live effectively, live a fulfilling life. And then also it works, part of this system is to work with perpetrators around changing their behaviours, and holding them to account, but also providing the opportunities for them to change their behaviours. So I can't talk about any specifics, but that is a broad overview of the kind of model, and the police are involved in key partner within delivery.
You feel it's been successful?
Yes, we have the data which shows that it's been successful in that it is effective at supporting women and girls to become safe and to recover. It's effective at working with young people around their kind of positive behaviours in relationships into women and girls. So we have the kind of evidence around that. There's lots of kind of systemic challenges around violence against women and girls because it's a hidden crime. Victims of domestic abuse are often repeat victims before they report to any services. There was a piece of research which is often quoted, which is that the victims who come forward to the police, they've been victimised at least on average 35 times before they report to the police. That was quite a historic piece of research. There's probably more up-to-date research on that, but that's an often quoted figure around domestic abuse.
Thank you.
Stuart, many people have mentioned smoking and the interesting smells that come from that. But actually, in my ward, there's a slight problem in different places with alcohol, and certainly Polish builders, at the end of the day, having a jar or four and not misbehaving, but just their presence. They're not having a nearby loo with all that entails, and just being reluctant to move on. There are certain parks where they have been where more alcohol is consumed, and I think it would be good for them. I just flag this up to you because it's certainly not directly within the higher levels of antisocial behaviour you see in Earl's Court.
Yeah.
But it is nonetheless real for people. And meeting some residents earlier this week, not wanting to go out and confront them because they've got young children and they don't want to run the risk of being biffed or whatever. I just flag that up to you as something else that needs to be aware of.
Yeah, so please do email me the locations, because we've got the parks police and we've got the wardens, and we can just put that on their patrol route, so that we can just kind of pick up on that, engage with those individuals, have conversations, try and alleviate that problem. If we're unable to do it that way, then we'll try and find another way. But do email me that over and we'll see what we can do.
One other thing, I scanned this rather than word checked it. I didn't see the word gang in it. Is that a deliberate omission or what?
Well, no, we've got gangs in this borough. We prefer to talk about youth violence and exploitation. Gangs, there's several definitions of gang. There's a Home Office definition of gang. We've definitely got gangs in this borough. When we talk about gangs, we talk about groups of individuals who are living a violent, offending lifestyle and do so as a group. But there were lots of challenges with the word gang, because gang sort of infers an organised group to a common aim, and that's in our experience, they tend to be chaotic, fluid, dynamic. Relationships that are incredibly strong one week are dangerously unstrong the next week. So there isn't, but that's, I'm not saying we don't have gangs. We have gangs, groups of young people who are violent offenders and who give themselves a name. Some don't, some do, who we would, looks like a gang, behaves like a gang, it is a gang. And also the other thing, just to say on that, the Met did a piece of research, and again, this is a little bit out of date, but I've no reason to think this is any different. They did a piece of research, and they looked at all of the individuals under the age of 25 who were stabbed or were perpetrators of the stabbing. They found 15% were gang affiliated. The rest was not. Sorry? 1-5 were gang affiliated, the rest were not. So if we just looked at the gangs, we'd miss all the others. But that's why we talk about youth violence and exploitation. But we do, it's not the ring of denying.
Thank you.
Does anyone really have a question? So I just picking up what David said about alcohol. Alcohol and drugs often go together, and certainly in our school, alcohol is a problem too. But thank you very much for coming along, Stuart. We'll work with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on. Catherine. So thank you very much for coming, Catherine. We've saved the best for last. And if you'd like to introduce the paper.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting us. I think we even asked to be invited because we particularly wanted to flag up all the incredible work that the Economic Department have been doing over the last 4 years, particularly given that it is a whole new department that only started in 2019. So particularly you will have all read this paper, and I won't go into huge detail because I hope you're going to ask us specific questions about that. But I thought it would be helpful to give an overview of what's happened to the businesses and also to employment, and then to highlight a few instances in the particular cases. As you all know, I don't need to tell you, COVID has had an absolute massive impact on the local economy, on both residents and on businesses. And it was exaggerated because central London was much harder hit really than anywhere else in the country. For sort of obvious reasons, tourism stopped immediately, and we rely heavily on tourism and visitors in this borough. Office, no one came into work. We have a lot of office space in this borough, and a lot of our residents moved to the country. And for businesses themselves, they have some of the highest property and overhead costs that they're also grappling with. So there were some specific sectors that got really hard hit, which were obviously the retail and hospitality and the leisure sectors. So the economy strategy was actually developed in 2019, and it was partly specifically developed to support the impact the Grenfell tragedy had on businesses and employment. And actually it turned out that it was really useful that we had put the economic strategy together, because a lot of the actions that were already in there and we'd already started developing became really important during COVID, because we were slightly set up and ready to move quicker than we might have been. So just to talk about employment levels, you'll see from the paper that they peaked in 2021. And obviously one of the real fears of everyone in the government particularly, which is why they put the furlough scheme in another support in, was the worry that when COVID had finished, there would be really, really high levels of unemployment. But actually, what slightly surprised us all, I guess, was that actually now we've come back to it's only 0.6 higher the level of unemployment than it was before the pandemic. But obviously it also affected certain groups of our residents harder than others. And specifically that was the 18 to 24-year-olds, ethnic minorities, and then there were certain things around the older age groups of the 50s, middle management age groups, who were left their jobs or whatever and haven't decided to go back to work. So what's emerging now is a really quite interesting and complex picture, because there are jobs. In fact, there are far more jobs maybe than we expected there to be. There are obviously still people that are unemployed, but actually maybe matching the unemployed and what sort of jobs they want, because quite rightly they're focusing on good jobs, which they should, with a good wage, but they also want to have jobs that perhaps have much more flexibility because they've been used to that during COVID. They don't necessarily want to work 5 days a week, they don't want to work at weekends. And businesses are struggling to match the people who are unemployed with the sort of jobs that they might want to offer. So particularly we've been hearing in the hospitality sector that it's really very hard to get anyone who now wants to work during the weekend. So there's going to be a lot of adaptation that needs to be made from the businesses about how they can actually develop more flexible jobs, more flexible working, how they can attract people, what can they add to the jobs that they're offering that are attractive. That might be in-work progression, better support, skills training. And what can we do as well as a council to actually help with this sort of slight mismatch that's going on at the moment? Because I would say the business's greatest concerns, which we all thought might have been Brexit or COVID, actually at the moment seem to be lack of staff. And that the thing that's hindering their productivity is that they can't actually employ enough people to do that. So as a council, what we need to do is really target support on those groups that are unemployed, so that we can help them develop their skills, help them develop their confidence, and help them move into the jobs that are available to sort of bridge those gaps. But certainly, and on top of the issues that we've got of matching jobs with the jobs that are available, we have to understand that because of the unpredictability of living through COVID lockdowns and the current uncertainty, of course, of the really barbaric war in Ukraine and the anxiety around the cost of living, that we think that will really exacerbate mental health issues and physical health issues, which of course, if you're suffering from both of those, they're both barriers that might prevent you moving into work. So that might be a particular area that we want to look at targeting support around. So just briefly to go over, and of course these are all in the paper so I won't dwell on them, but I wanted to highlight a few things. And obviously I wanted to highlight the amazing work that officers have done in this department, particularly Mr. Graham sitting next to me, was actually the real success that this department had in developing very rapid, strong relationships with business when COVID struck. And it was a sort of, it's turned out to be a really good long-term benefit, a COVID positive, if we might say it like that. So one of the first things that we did when we couldn't see each other and we were all working from home, is we set up a lot of forums that we could convene certain groups together. So we had landlords together in one group, we had the cultural sector, we had museums, we had a very memorable one with all the hairdressers in the borough, which was quite interesting. Obviously we had retail, but actually getting those groups together in forums wasn't just interesting for us as a council to understand how we might be able to support them and listen to what their problems were, but it also meant that they could support each other and support their own close network groups. So I think it's been building these forums, these relationships, and really strengthening those between the council and businesses in the borough have just been a thing that I think will be really beneficial in the future for how we work. And particularly I wanted to flag up, of course, we now have a business relationship manager that we didn't have before, that came out of things we need, who specifically is going around and talking to our businesses on a one-to-one basis about, what they might look to the council to support them with. But at the same time, is saying, well, have you got some apprenticeships? Maybe you've got some work experience. So it's a really sort of very effective dual role that we've gone on. We're going down that line, which also coming onto is working very closely with our employment side, where we've just employed somebody who's specifically looking at apprenticeships. So there's a sort of handover from the business manager, has got these wonderful opportunities, can hand it on to our apprenticeship lady, Susan, who can then go out to talk to schools, voluntary organisations. So just generally, there's a sort of really good, I hope, circular economy that we've built up between our relationship with our business. What opportunities have they got to work closer with our residents in the borough, and how do we flag up those opportunities to our residents in the borough so that they might be able to take advantage of those. But headlines, obviously, I would say with the COVID sort of highlights, of course, is 3 business improvement districts, which have come since then, which between them all over the next 5 years will bring £5 million to supporting 3 high streets, and we're looking at doing 3 more. So I think that's really great. I'd like to highlight how quickly Graham managed to set up the council's own business hardship fund, which was £500,000 that we set up in an ARG, which was a sort of, they had to apply for funding, and we assessed what funding, how we could specifically help people who were maybe missing out on some of the government COVID grants, support them. And also actually how very quickly our business rates team forensically scrutinised the businesses and the applications for grants, and actually got them out quickly. And I would hope, and I think we did do a really good job of making sure that those grants went to the right people and under the government guidelines that they were meant to go to. And I think that's an important thing to note. The support for employment, you will see, is all listed out. We wanted to make sure you really saw that, because there's a lot of, we often get asked questions about what are you doing. There's no support for, how we get people into employment in this borough. And actually, I think there really is a lot of support, some of what the council has developed itself, but also working with our partners. So again, I'll just highlight a few things with those. One of them particularly is the Community Works programme that was came out of, we were looking as to how we could support the Grenfell affected community think about getting back into work. And Graham might like to talk about that, because it was a huge amount of community engagement went into it. And it was really a genuine piece of co-design that they told us how they would like to be supported. And then the council actually developed that piece of support. So that was great. The Kickstart Scheme, which was obviously a government scheme, but the council picked that up very quickly and became a gateway for that Kickstart Scheme, and actually was incredibly successful in that 70% of the council-led gateway opportunities, so that was the council asked for opportunities with business, how they could offer kickstarts, and 70% were filled, which actually that's against a London average of only 43% filled. So I think that again proves our really close relationship that we now have with business and our residents, that we got people to pick those up. And we're now in the middle of developing a quick start scheme, which will be a council funded scheme, which actually is going to increase the age range up to 30, because the quick start was only up to 24. But we recognise that actually, if you're 25 to 30, that has also been a really difficult time for you, and that they were missing out on some of the opportunities. So that's an interesting one to look at. And I've mentioned Susan and the apprenticeship scheme, and I just wanted to highlight actually also through the work that she's done and the economic development team have done, that we've increased the amount of apprenticeships that people have taken up in this borough to 410, and that's an increase in 65 from last year. So it's on an upward trajectory, and obviously there's a lot further we can go now that we've actually sort of flagged up all these other apprenticeship opportunities that the businesses, now we have much closer relationships with them, are really keen to offer us. And just very finally, because I've probably already spoken far too much, I just also wanted to flag up the 1.25 million that the council has committed in their COVID recovery fund, which is specifically going to be focused on youth, and that was developed with the youth team, and I think there's also some details about it in the paper. But I think I'll stop now. But I think what we all know is the future is very unpredictable, and we've all got to be flexible and adaptable to what the needs for our businesses and our residents are going to be. So thank you very much.
Do you wish to say anything, Mr. Hart, or?
Yes, indeed. I'll try and keep it fairly brief, because we obviously like to take your questions and hear what you think of the paper. And I've been name checked very kindly on several occasions. Just to point out, there is a team in economic development and adult learning of 14 members of staff currently, and also we work very closely with other colleagues in the council, voluntary community sector, and further afield with other agencies. And that's one of the aspects of this work. It's a broad area of policy, whether it's employment, skills, businesses, adult learning, and there's lots of other agencies and actors in quite a complex and crowded sort of field, really. And in many cases, the council is not the main agency that has all the resources to hand, or even the statutory responsibility to provide all of these things. So it is very much about the relationships, the partnerships, and trying to lever in also support from those that do have the resources, the Department of Work and Pensions and others, for example. Catherine mentioned the community works piece, and that was affected during the COVID-19, during the lockdown, because we've just gone through a period of identifying needs by interviewing residents about their specific needs and their life journeys around employment and skills that have been affected by the Grenfell fire tragedy. And on the back of that, we held some kind of co-design workshops in the community where we had in excess of 300 specific sort of ideas on different themes, such as flexible jobs, support for young people, support for starting a business, and so on. And then we had to work during lockdown in sort of online meetings with community representatives, some RAs and other voluntary community organisations and resident representatives, to sift and develop that into some projects that were deliverable for the funding that had been committed. And then at 2 Grenfell community assemblies, they were whittled down to really what were the kind of priority choices. And that's what's recently been commissioned and is commencing last month, and indeed from the 1st of April, which is on the one hand personalised one-to-one advice and support for residents from the community to provide at locations close to them, and also some confidence building programmes with community organisations focusing on different cohorts. So there's a women-only group, there's a young persons group, and there's a kind of an all-comers group with providers who develop programmes that are more progressing people to acknowledge the skills and build on their confidence so they can progress towards work, whereas the one-to-one advice is very much about individual plans to help people get into work, good jobs, and also that they're sustainable jobs as well. So I'll stop there because it's a very broad paper, it covers a lot of areas, a lot of energy and activity, and there's still, obviously there's a lot more to do. There's always more that can be done in these areas.
Thank you. I think Sarah first, and
Thank you, Catherine, and your team. I mean, I can't believe you've come so far in such a short time. But I really just wanted to thank you for putting together the High Street Kensington bid. It's so important. My mailbag, people on the street, all they ask is what's happening to the High Street, the state of the High Street. To get over 300 businesses to sign up, I think it's amazing. So, very well done. Thank you.
Greg.
Thanks, Chair, and I'd also like to say thanks to the lead member and her officers for the paper and the work that's gone on behind this. And likewise to pick up on the business improvement districts, because I think I'd like to understand a bit more about them, and I know Kensington High Street is one of them, but I wonder if you could just remind me where the other two are, where the three prospective ones are, and what's actually the council's role in facilitating them? Because it's not something the council dictates, it's something that seems to emerge. So perhaps you could say a bit more about them and improve my understanding. Is my first question, please.
I can fill you in on that. So where there currently is a bid on Brompton Road, the King's Road, and on Kensington High Street. So the Brompton Road and the King's Road one were very much led by Cadogan Estates, because obviously they own so much property in that area. So, although we love taking lots of credit for it, and we did have officers involved, they sort of did the real sort of hard work on getting those two bids over the line. But the Kensington High Street one was a completely different thing, and actually the council did support and facilitate the funding to make that happen. So that was the difference behind that. And it was, it was really, really touch and go, I have to say, because it was so complex, because there are this many individual businesses on Kensington High Street, and no one sort of land owner who owned a lot of them that could help push them over the line. And so we employed a company called The Means, who worked with us, obviously, to get that done. But little did we know just before Christmas, when all the ballots had gone out, that not only we would have a re-emergence of COVID, which shut all the shops down, so there was no one there to go and talk to about, getting them to sign up to the bid. But then, of course, the post all went haywire, and when all the ballot proposals were sent out, none of them were arriving anywhere. So I have to say then, again, that was really all hands to the deck with officers, and even myself, I had to go on LinkedIn to track down who some of the business owner managers were, to go talk to us, we need you to sign up to this proposal. Anyway, the great news was it did, we got it over the line, and I think it's going to really improve Kensington High Street. So the three more that we're proposing and looking at, and this is very much, we haven't even done a feasibility study, but it's looking to the future, is potentially one on Portobello Road and Goldbourne Road, and we were looking at a potential CID, which is a community improvement district, which is quite a novel and actually doesn't even exist yet concept, where you actually can engage more of the community in it. And the other area would be Notting Hill Gate, which might include Westbourne. Westbourne Grove might be in Portobello or Notting Hill Gate, and then Earl's Court. And actually I wanted to mention Malcolm to do with that. Because the great sadness is that before all of us, as we know, Malcolm was on the Chamber of Commerce. He was a great supporter of them, and way before we were even talking about bids in the council, Malcolm was going, bids. Why aren't we doing a bid? Come on, do a bid. And I said to him, if we get the Kensington High Street one over the line, you're next. We're going to come. And the beam on his face was like, he was just so excited that was going to be the next thing that we're looking at. So it's just huge sadness that he's not here to work on that, because he would just loved it. So we're already flagging up, maybe there's somewhere we can call it the Spalding bid or the Spalding something, because I think he was such a driver behind that.
Thanks very much for your answer on that, and it's clearly a hugely welcome initiative, and I can see that these major streets that you suggested as the next three are highly appropriate. The other angle to this I'd like to explore is what about what can we do to help the rather tired secondary high streets, of which we've got quite a few. I would be thinking Gloucester Road and Old Brompton Road from my area, but there's quite a few of those around the boroughs. As shopping habits change, we can't support the number of retail units that we've got, and there's only room for so many chains. What's your thoughts?
So, actually, this is it's sort of interesting that my portfolio sort of straddles a few departments, and so actually we are doing quite a bit of work on that, which is sort of independent, although I know that the economic development team are plucking in and out of it. So we have a high streets team actually, which comes under culture and place department, and that's been led by Sue Foster. Wonderful Sue Foster, who we cling on to because she's so creative and inventive, and and Verona Cornwall, and so we actually have commissioned a whole piece of work. Well, we've done quite a lot of work around that actually. One was with the citizens panel, so we convened various panels over the different areas of the borough to say, as residents, what do you think needs improving, what do you want to do? When we got the result of the citizens panel that we wanted to do, we then went out with a survey through mutual aid to sort of get feedback again to say, this is what residents have said they want to see, do you agree, is this what you want to see happening? And then we commissioned the Centre for London, who specifically, interestingly, looked at Gloucester Road as one of the areas. They looked at the Gloucester Road, Notting Hill Gate and the Portobello Road, and they've done a sort of deep dive into what could be quick wins looking at those areas. So we're actually about to come back with that paper on what their recommendations are on those areas. So if you can, maybe you'll ask us back if we're around, if I'm around, to actually report back on that piece of it, because it's a really sort of interesting suggestions that they've come up with. And then out of that, actually, interestingly, we launched a design project on Notting Hill Gate, which is now live, where we got an independent architectural body to run this design project, and we just found out we've got 30 applications, 30 concepts, and this is actually slightly for quick win things for Notting Hill Gate to make it look a bit more fun and cheery and give it a reason for people to come and visit it. And we're looking at those next week. So then a panel was convened. So again, that's going to be a panel outside the council that will decide on what are those ideas might be brought forward. There's a budget to actually implement some of those quite quickly. So there is a lot going on in that space, because again, that's what COVID has highlighted, that interestingly, the small high streets, small little village limits, like the Stratford Road bit where you've got your grocer, your butcher, the residents were they did quite well. It was the main high streets that did really badly, and it's a bit like, how is this going to pan out? We're not exactly sure. Will all the visitors come back? Will the high streets change what the shops they've got on the high streets? That might mean there's more advantage for the smaller high streets to pick up on the more sort of local shopping areas. Did people all go back online? And are they going to change their habit to go back to shopping in person on a high street? So, we don't really know, but one of the things that is really, I think, exciting about the High Streets team is the obsession that they've got with data. So we all love data, and actually sort of monitoring, because we pick up all the credit card spending. So where are the people coming from? What are they actually spending their money on? How many people are walking to the high street? What is the footfall like? And there's some sort of really interesting data that we're monitoring around that that will come back, and I think it would be interesting for this committee to actually do a sort of deep dive into the high streets themselves and what we've learned and what could be done, if I can suggest a subject.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
I think I was going to say, a while ago, I mean, this is going back a long time ago, that we were going to have a working group looking into it, into the high street with Emma, when Emma was a backbencher for that time, and then it never happened. So I think, particularly now, after COVID and the changes that are happening in how people shop, and I mean, you have to get very creative now to try and get life back into the high street. So I think there would be a very interesting thing to do. Okay, everyone wants to talk. So
David was first.
What I've got ties in with the last bit. Catherine, taking on what you just said, what are the planning implications of empty buildings, particularly when Greg talked about there being fewer retail spaces needed? What thinking have you done in your portfolio as to what we're going to do with the empty spaces?
Well, this has been addressed in the local plan. I'm sure you've read all 600 pages of it.
Yes.
But what was that document called? The the asset review.
So as part of
Yeah.
the evidence base
Yes.
for the review of the local plan,
Mm.
Colleagues in Planning commissioned the employment land study.
Yeah.
So that was commissioned and finished around November 2021. And that looked at the projections in terms of the various types of employment land usage. So it's about office space, but it's also the retail needs assessment kind of comes in as part of that work too. And actually in some areas, in looking, for example, along High Street, Kensington, there were worries when you saw hoardings and boards gone. But actually there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of confidence on the back of people investing in these properties to redevelop them, to bring them back into use. It's probably too early in the recovery around changes of use, particularly more in the office sector, possibly than retail at the moment, around what the short to medium term demand's going to be in there. But on the retail side, particularly in the high streets locations or on the secondary locations, there still seems to be a level of confidence about the future of bricks and mortar, and indeed have Amazon not appeared on high streets more frequently with their offering too. There's some really detailed and granular evidence in supporting the local plan. If you wish to delve into either the retail needs or the wider employment land study, there's a wealth of information there that our planning colleagues are using to inform the policies going forward.
Jared, then. Jared.
Yes, I wanted to say you did a fantastic job during the pandemic, supporting businesses, understanding the different problems that arose, and your analysis as we are on this side of it. With the staff shortages, are you seeing a connection between the apprenticeships and actually going into work? Are they winding up in jobs, and what kind of apprenticeships are you seeing? And how are you recruiting people into the apprenticeships?
Well, I'll start and then Graham
Okay.
will follow. So it's very well. So it's just start with Kickstart, so that's more sort of immediate that we're seeing the results. So the Kickstart's been really effective. Of the Kickstarters, I think a huge majority of them have now been offered a job on the back of doing that work experience when they were paid to do Kickstart. I mean, with the apprenticeships and the improvement, the improved number of that, I don't know if we've actually got the numbers of how they're staying on, but I think the really important piece of work we're doing is actually talking a lot more to colleges and schools about the real advantage of taking on an apprenticeship, because obviously that's likely to be for 3 years, so it's a longer term. Obviously you earn while you learn, and you probably will get a job at the end of it, and you won't get any student debt at the end of it. But what we pick up the whole time when we're talking about apprenticeships is this thing that there's a slight stigma, that people still sort of think that it's, we want to go to university and get a degree rather than do an apprenticeship. So there's that perception, and this is the work that Susan and colleagues are doing to really shift that and to get to just give more information to the schools and colleges and to the young people and to their parents, because a lot of it comes from pushy parents saying go and get a degree somewhere, to sort of look more at apprenticeships and seeing what of just a vast array, all different levels, from right down level 1 right through to graduate levels as well, that maybe more graduates should be looking at doing. Right.
Yes, well, one of the areas of policy of this is the apprenticeship levy, where the government, on larger employers with large payrolls, tax them through the levy, which we then must use, and the council indeed as part of this, must use to increase apprenticeships and develop staff. Now overall that led to a decline in the number of apprenticeship starts nationally. It's no surprise that in yesterday's announcement the Chancellor said he's going to be reviewing the flexibilities around the apprenticeship levy, because it did lead to a decline overall, and indeed central London has had lower levels of apprenticeships generally. So we see an increase in the numbers we referred to earlier in the meeting about RBKC in 2020-21, but actually that's probably from a fairly low base. And there are a lot of myths around formal apprenticeships, which are essentially you learn and earn while you're working. So you've got your job, but you also do some off-the-job training, formal training at a college or institution, and you will get a recognised qualification. So you're doing both things at the same time. And what we have seen is a change, particularly in education, where at one point it was hard to get into schools to talk about apprenticeships because they wanted to hang on to the pupils, take them down the academic route, keep their roles high, keep their funding strong. Well, actually, with high quality apprenticeships where you can go through to the higher levels, degree and postgraduate, it's a really solid route, particularly with in comparison to building up student loans, student debt, and learning that way. It's not an easier route because you've got to work at the same time, and the challenges will be strong. It might take you longer to get there. But I think there's increasing awareness and understanding. But one of the reasons why I think the apprenticeship coordinator role and why Catherine wanted that role as part of the economy strategy, you need to stimulate the local market. You need to increase young people, well, any age actually, because apprenticeships can be any age, but people's awareness about what the opportunities there are. Smaller employers in particular about an apprenticeship might be a route, and they could take on a person in an apprenticeship, and that could be valuable to them. And that role is essentially, over the last year or so, stimulating the local conversation and raising the awareness. And that can only be a good thing in terms of it being a solid and good route forward. But there's also, there are other activities where employers might call them apprenticeships, but if they're not providing the off-the-job and the qualification and that opportunity for progression, it's an abuse of the term, effectively. So, we need to make sure that it's quality apprenticeships, recognised qualifications, and it is formal, rather than something like work experience or an internship or something like that, which can have their place. But yes, so there's still a lot of work to do, but I think it's an area where there are real opportunities for people to secure kind of long-term, getting good qualifications, to secure long-term careers.
Thank you. On page 26, there is a bullet point about forums you mentioned, business forums you've started last year or the year before. So my question is, what's the reason behind this to link them to the unemployed in the borough, to try to encourage the local businesses, small or medium or large businesses, to employ our residents in here because it's environmentally much better? They don't need to travel. Some of them are walking distance from their homes. Was that the main reason, or was there other reasons?
I think that
Or was it
main,
successful? Has it been successful so far?
yeah. So I think the main reason, for example, the North Kensington Connect, which is the North Kensington Business Forum, and they've now got over 110 members, which was pretty impressive to sign them all up in such a short period of time. And so it's as much about creating a business community. So they share skills. So for example, they've got somebody who's a real expert on digital marketing. And when they have their forums and they talk to each other, and there's somebody else going, I really need to digital marketing it, they are sharing between each other. So David's saying, I'll come and help you on your digital marketing. And there's another chap who's an amazing DJ, so he will come and do a party to support another event. So it's them working together, but as well as them all working together and supporting each other as a sort of business community, absolutely, they will be saying, we've got some jobs in this, which again will be fed through our opportunities. One of the things that is actually in one of our actions is building this portal that we're building. And what will happen on the sort of opportunities portal is that, so for example, if we know a North Kensington business is looking for somebody as a job or something, it can be put upon our opportunities portal. One of the things that we made very clear when we were designing this is that we don't want to become an employment agency, because that isn't the role of a council to do that and manage all the issues that might come with it. But we do want people to know what might be available. So the portal, when it's made, which hopefully will be in June, it will appear, is that it will be available for those people who are supporting people into work, so that they will be working alongside someone, for example, at Clement James or Nova or any of our partners that we're working, supporting people into employment. So that the young person or old person will sit down and go, I want a job in hospitality, and they'll go, here are 5 options, and then help make sure that they apply, that they're ready for the interview, and sort of support them through to hopefully getting that job. So I think that will be way. But I think all of the business forums have acted in slightly a different way, and I would say that the North Kensington one has just been particularly successful. I mean, you know, they're unstoppable really, and they're sort of how they've managed to get people to work together. It's been very exciting to watch.
That forum in particular sprung out of some of the businesses in the vicinity of Grenfell, some of the businesses in the Archers, Silchester, Royal places like that. And they were very keen to work together and collaborate about the development and what could be done to improve the economy in North Kensington. So it was partly coming out of their ambition, so from the businesses themselves, and then it's grown from there really into something that's a bit broader, but very much about the networking for those businesses. So that's an example, I think, where from the council side we have responded to their lead. And Earl's Court is perhaps a bit more linked to the issues of the development site and a need to be trying to increase the voice and get one voice for businesses in that area. So it's like different sort of purposes and reasons, but linking into the good things that can happen as a result of that, I think is exactly what, you know, medium to longer term you want to try and access opportunities with those businesses.
Yes, and actually not to forget the Kensington Business Forum, who led on the bid with us and were very supportive and helpful with getting the bid across the line. So as Graham said, they've all slightly functioned in a bit of a different way.
Can I just ask, you say that there is more economic inactivities. I just wondered how you work out who exactly is economically inactive, and how do you encourage those people back into the workforce? You know, if we've got more vacancies than we have people looking for jobs.
I mean, if we want to hear from you.
Yes.
So, economic inactivity is something that's measured by the government. So it's put together through something called the annual population survey, which is based on a sample, and from that they extrapolate numbers that that are economically inactive. So
can they do that to borough level?
Yes, they do that to borough level. Okay. So it's about 35,000 in Kensington and Chelsea, and then that's broken down into the different categories that come under that. So that's student, people looking after other people or a family, people that are off sick, or people that are retired and discouraged.
But do people looking after children, does that?
Looking after families in there. So the largest proportion under that is students. There's 14,000 people with students, and then there's about 8,000 odd looking after family. And then helpfully within that statistic, they break it down into people who want a job and people who don't want a job. So out of that 35,000, 10,000, just over 10,000 would like a job. So what that tells you is that in addition, to the unemployment figure, which is taken from claimant count, which is 4 and a bit thousand, that somewhere between 4 and a bit thousand and 10,000 people in the borough would like to get into work but have a barrier to getting into work. So that's whether they might not have the right skills, they might be looking after family, that there are barriers to them getting to work. But this figure is always very interesting and is a difficult group to support. But if you take this figure with what we're seeing generally in the labour market, particularly with those in over 50s dropping out of the labour market, which for various different reasons, they might not actually show up in some of these statistics. So what it points to is actually a larger group that might need some help with reskilling or upskilling to equip themselves to access the labour market as it is today. So it's something that we need to be mindful of as we look to renew the economic strategy for the next term as well.
Okay, thank you. So Catherine, Graham and Lee, thank you very much for coming. I mean, you're obviously doing an awful lot of work and there's a lot of innovation. So like to congratulate you on all that you've done, and we look forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you. And also I'd again like to just put on record my thanks to the whole team. They've been absolutely fantastic and have really worked flat out to make all of this happen. So thank you very much, team. Sorry I can't name you all.
Well done, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Moving on. The work programme. So I've only got a few things to say. And firstly, we have the master tracker, which I think is a great innovation. And we're going to develop that. Thanks, Jackie.
We are. We've got quite a few bits of information to still put in, as I mentioned in the report, because the committees have just been meeting over the last week. So there are recommendations to go in from housing and communities, and family services and environment. So
and also to say in future, we'll have another column at the end, which will be whether it's been implemented, partially implemented, etc.
yes, we've got that. But I agreed that we shade out things that have been completed because Councillor Hammond asked me to do that. So we've done it for some of them. So I go to page 62, and I'm looking at housing and communities, where some of their actions have been fully complete. I've phased those out.
The shaded out one, I'm on 62 now as well.
Yeah.
It says, so going down to the one just above the bottom one, and it says partially accepted, but it's shaded out. Does that mean it's been partially implemented or?
So you're looking at the recommendation for housing, safety and health homes.
Yes.
Yeah, it was partially accepted, so the bit that was partially accepted has been fully implemented. So the select committee gets a fuller version of the recommendation tracker, so they've been informed that they've had a full response from the lead member on that.
So, and just to say about the work programme going forward, I think the items we're carrying over are flooding working group, and we also, it's been referred to the leadership team, but we've got to keep an eye on the call to action. The budget working group should start again after the election, and it will need a new chair. And then I think Catherine mentioned doing some work looking at, I'm not quite sure what that will be, looking at high streets. I think that's an important thing to do. So does anyone have any comments about the work we've done so far this year?
Not just this year, this cycle.
Yes. Oh yeah. So cycle. I think, well, I would say, I think the budget working group has been very, very effective. And in terms of this committee, I think, yeah, well, we haven't finished it, but I think the flooding is going to be a really important strand of work as well. So I don't know if
Because if not many people work per ward are affected, those who are affected are really affected.
Yeah.
It has a huge, huge impact.
I don't know anything you want to say. Don't know if Chair, Janet, would you like to say something?
Yes, where, I know it's coming to 5 years after Grenfell, and I was wondering what will we be doing in terms of scrutiny? Will we be covering in each of our committees? We do the support for families in our committee, so I was just wondering, this is an ongoing topic for scrutiny.
Which I don't really know. I mean, so this committee, we usually, we've got the overall responsibility for scrutinising Grenfell recovery. We also do the dedicated service.
So I think one of the things that came out of the working group, the mental health working group, was camps. And maybe family and children's services looking more into the camps.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, but that certainly came up.
Janet, my hunch is that things will become much, much clearer after the elections.
I think we're all going to be affected by the 5-year anniversary, but I'm not sure that we really want to go down the road of like assessing, you know, how much we've achieved or all the rest of it. I think it's something which will, be difficult. Would be very difficult for residents. But I'm not sure that we can actually scrutinise it.
Yeah, no, that wasn't really my question. I was just wondering what aspects will be going forward, but as David says, it will become clearer after the election. But Sarah made a good point, is that we can definitely keep an eye on it in terms of the mental effects. Mental health is very important.
With mental health provision in schools and camps, and
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a really big area.
Right.
I was just going to say, I think I agree with the points you made, MT, about the issues that we ought to carry, that ought to be carried forward, and recognising that none of us may be in our seats in 6 weeks' time, so it might be a completely different set of
Well, I
people
know,
to
so,
take forward.
you know.
But looking backwards, at the end of 4 years, I just want to say thank you to our officers who supported us with all this work, to Jackie and her team, and our governance team, or Tom and sitting Martin's seat, but you've taken over, Robert, and everybody that supported us in our work for the last 4 years on this committee and its subsidiary committees.
And I don't know what Greg said.
Here.
No.
Well, I start by thanking you, MT, yourself, because you've done a fantastic job in chairing this committee. You have tried to be inclusive, always very patient, try to include residents, whoever at the back seat, which I haven't seen in other committees. So I would like to thank you personally for that. And as well as thanking the officers, and Tom just stepped in nearly 2 years ago. Now he's a star. So that's very well.
Amazing.
Yes.
We don't want to take him home to sort out our own computers at home.
So I think, scrutiny, I think it has improved since we had the new system. We now have yearly planning with all the backbenchers coming, which we didn't used to do, so we've got a kind of a roadmap. We have our tracker, so that what we're looking at, we have fewer items on each agenda, so that we can actually really talk about them properly. We make our recommendations to the leadership team. More of the recommendations are being taken up, and got the tracker now, so we'll find out eventually, you know, we will find out if some of them don't get implemented or when they get implemented. So I think, scrutiny is probably in a better shape than it was 4 years ago. So I'd like to thank all of the members of my committee and of course our officers, Jackie in particular, but also Tom, Robert, and also Paula.
Hi, Robert.
Paula,
So
and
quiet in the corner.
James. So there we are.
And thank you, MG. Excellent caring.
And if you have anything, I need to think about it. Well, I do. Adrian is not here, but Adrian has been, as chair of the budget working group, he has really put in some sterling work, and I think he has done a very good job on the budget working group, and I'm very sorry to lose him. But there we are.
Yes.
It would not be my choice. But yes, I'm very grateful to Adrian as a vice chair, but particularly as the chair of the budget working group, because I really think, you know, and that's something you've got to keep up with somebody else doing it, obviously, because, you know, looking at the budget, you can't just do it in a couple of sessions. You have to do it kind of throughout. So anyway, so thank you all,
Thank you.
Thank you.
and enjoy the elections.
That sounds like the last one, sort of.
What?
It sounds like the last.
It sounds like a really, everyone.